My name is Matt Johnson. Eastedge is my new business, and like Ed mentioned, about 10 years ago, I worked with a guy named Calvin Carter in a coffee shop, Starbucks, and coming up with ideas when the iPhone originally dropped as to what are these experiences going to be like? What are they going to mean for people? We've seen what Apple's produced, but we want to build these things. We want to build them direct to consumers. So that's been my last 10 years as a journey through mobile, but there was a rude interruption kind of in the middle of it, which I'll talk about when the first virtual reality headsets, and I say the first, I mean the modern virtual reality headsets dropped. Changed my perspective on what I want to do with my future. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the bottle rocket side and how it got there, and then some of the prototyping and explorations we did, and even the client work with some case studies that we built for people in both mixed reality and virtual reality, and then go into kind of talking about what Eastedge's perspective is, some work that we're doing there, and then kind of end up with this puzzle piece diagram that shows where it fits in the overall ecosystem of actionable insights, as I like to call it, right? We're all here because we have a piece of the puzzle, and how are they all going to fit together to build something meaningful for humans at the end of the day? That's where it all should end, right? Except for this sci-fi robots. I'm anxious to hear about how it might end with them instead of us. But that's another topic. Here's your obligatory logo soup. Only to say that the experience that we've had at Bottle Rocket has been very diverse. We didn't build a platform, at least at the start. We focused on bespoke development, client services, things like that. But we were fortunate enough to be early on and get involved with a lot of great companies, from Lego to Coca-Cola to NBC. Did a lot in the video space, and that is the one area we did dip into a platform. So we built a platform called Awe pretty early on after we did work for Discovery Channel. And I don't know, in the last Olympics that were here, any of the streaming that you did from your devices was actually run from the platform. It's kind of a cool brag there, but that's what got us into a lot of the media and entertainment space. And my background before this was in a lot in gaming, so I brought some of those expertise to the table, and we've done a lot of work in this company with some YouTube brands. You can see a couple of them here. You know, everyone from Dwayne Johnson and The Rock, which we built a 3D fighting application around WrestleMania, which I got to go to and recommended it. It's crazy. If anyone gets an opportunity to do something like that, it's pretty fun. But mainly focused around YouTube brands. So this idea that we could build these engagement pieces that extend their video content, and have some kind of rev share arrangement with them to build these kind of apps. And we've had a number of success stories at the top of that charts with YouTube brands as well. So part of my new business is also focused on gaming. So XR is one half of it, building experiences for them, and then gaming is the other half. So it's really important because a lot of the tools that we have built with over the years actually migrated over into XR, things like Unity and Unreal, which is what we use day in and day out to create these experiences or gaming tools to begin with. So they all kind of merged into these experiential media tools. And by the way, stop me if you see a slide that looks something weird, or you had a friend who worked on a project, or you just want to make a random comment. I mean, feel free to just let's have an open discussion, because this isn't a linear presentation. The cable's one way, Ed, but not the discussion.
You don't know us very well, do you?
I know Maria, so actually some of it, Aaron. So as I mentioned, the disruption that happened for me was back in 2013. I got involved in Kickstarter once. I was like, oh, what's Kickstarter? And someone said, yeah, they got some stuff you might think that's neat on there. So I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. So invested a little bit up front in this device, and I would say that when this got delivered, it was the first time in my 25-year career that I was sitting there and I didn't know what to expect before I put it on. Right, I'd seen it all. I've been staring at rectangles since I was 5 years old. The TRS-80, right? Oh gosh. Yeah, Commodore 64 TRS-80. Yeah. That's somewhere I was going to program. Making friends. Okay. So for the first time, it was like, okay, I don't know. I've heard what this described to be. I don't know what this is going to be. So I remember putting it on. My wife was sitting there staring at me, making funny videos, probably on her phone, of me looking around the house. But there was this demo it shipped with, which was a Tuscany villa. And I remember going around this thing, and it was the most terrible user experience, nausea-inducing, thing. It had you going up and down stairs, and my stomach was all upset. And I took this off, and she's like, well, what do you think? And I'm just like, it's just the most amazing thing ever. And it's not because of the terrible experience I had, but it's because Moore's Law, right? It's just like I saw where this thing was going to be in 10 years. I mean, this is just scratching the surface of where we're in, and we still are, even with the modern ones where we've incorporated 6 degrees of freedom in our hands, and we've got spatial tracking and things like that. We are still really at the beginning. So that was just kind of one of those points that said, yeah, mobile has been great, but I need to start a trajectory or a path to get me more involved in this type of a product. So then we did get into prototyping, because that's really what we're big on. I was like, what are the use cases that are just really going to transform this? So Bottle Rocket has a big culture of hackathons. We do something called Rocket Science each year, where we shut down the company for 2 days and you build whatever you want. So about that time, the first Htc Vive was coming out, which is a room scale VR device. So it has sensors on either side of the room, and it can track you up to like 15, 20 feet or something like that. And saying hands are really an incredible part of the immersion of this experience. And I think the construction industry are teaching people how to build certain things. And I have the least, I mean, ask Marie, my wife, kids all the time, are like, you are the most non-handy person for being the most technical person I know. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to teach myself how to build stuff then, dear. So created this construction app just to kind of prove out some of the UI and the hands and everything like that. 24 hours, built this, won the hackathon. Everyone was just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. This is like the cost. None of these materials are real. I can be as destructive as I want. You know, yeah, this is going to be useful in focused training scenarios. And while we've had mobile now for 7 or 8 years in its modern implementation, it's a world of distraction. I mean, you got the world going on around you. You've got lots of things pushing for your attention. This is focused learning here, and that's what really built my kind of core of like, I want to go out there and build focused learning experiences in VR at this time before really we start talking about the overall ecosystem. So the other half of that was, okay, great, Matt, we love the idea of these hackathons that you're building, but you're going to have to build something that we sell, because we were a client services business, right? And you know, our brand's going to care about this, really. So I said, well, sure they are. Let me build something that's going to resonate with everyone. Let me reimagine the game Galaga, but in virtual reality. So we actually built this thing in the first Oculus headset. I took it to E3, got a meeting with Palmer Luckey and the guys at Oculus. They said, this is awesome, but we want you to sign an NDA and do something else with it. I was like, okay, not what I was expecting, but we got this taped a piece of mobile hardware and 3D printed plastic in the mail about a week later and said, build it to this. And it was the first implementation of the Gear VR, which was the first mobile driven headset, really. So we actually built one of the first experiences as a game for Oculus Connect, their first developer conference, on the Gear VR before it really was the Gear VR. But that project allowed me to take this and move it into the realm of showing, hey, instead of all these wires and these big computers and this clunky type of experience that you have to have, hand your customer this. And so it opened up the opportunity for activations with some of our brands, which I'll talk about here in just a little bit. So this breadth of experience in moving forward into today has led me to that fifth entrepreneurial experience in saying, I want to take that gaming experience, I want to take that augmented virtual reality experience and create a company. Right, I'm just down the road, working out of my house. There's no like hype here. It's lean and mean again, and I love it because we're just building great things. But get opportunities to work with partners and scale my business that way, using a lot of freelancers through cool new platforms and portals like Upwork. I don't know if anyone's ever utilized Upwork for that. I'm running about 15 guys on Upwork right now. It is an adventure, but I've got my digital communication skills at their all-time high right now. But it's a cool new way to think about how do we scale a business without having to build the infrastructure and the costs associated with that and the overhead associated with that. So just being creative on the business side, but just loving at this stage of my career building great experiences and exploring things and innovating on things, right? And we'll figure out the business model as we go along.
What is this? Is this written in, is this all Unreal? Or what do you?
Most of the stuff you've seen is Unity. We've done a couple of prototyping projects in Unreal, but the teams that I've led over the years, I've had a team of up to like 40 people that have been Unity developers. So funny aside on that with Unity, the business we don't talk about. We were looking for a platform, or a 3D platform to build for a Native American tribe project that we had in Louisiana. They wanted to do a hunting game, and I was like, okay, this was probably back in 2006. And so I went down to South by Southwest that year to find out a partner for development. Every one of the 3D engines were like, okay, $50,000 license for one title. I'm like, as a startup, I can't afford that kind of thing. Searched around, and there was these 3 guys in a 10 by 10 pop-up booth in the back corner that could barely afford their lunch, I don't think. Unity, okay, sure, what are you guys about? And so they kind of, I like the guys, and they kind of pitched me, and it's like, well, but we're on Mac only, and I was using PC at the time. It's like, okay, so I went out, they said, we have our get-together, our conference, next week in San Francisco. I went out and rented a Mac, flew out there, just because this is the only one I could afford, so it's kind of cornered it. Flew out there, sat down in this room, had to help them set up tables in the room and everything like that. Sat down. Turned out being the first Unite conference there. There was about 15 of us in the room, and now there's tens of thousands of people that attend this. I mean, it's the largest developer, game engine conference in the world. So, kind of a fun aside there, but I've been very dedicated to that engine for years and built up a lot of expertise and portfolio around the engine.
Apparently, you chose right.
Yeah, and Unreal is still a great solution and opportunity depending on what you're trying to do. I've seen some amazing high-end medical visualization and some things that really need hyper-realism, and I think Unreal does a fantastic job of that. So I'll just brush over this real quick. Really, this is kind of the challenges that I thought were in front of us as a general society in terms of why branch off and create this kind of a company. And some of the more interesting ones in here is, I think, this idea of mastering empathetic communication skills. Some of the early stuff we started doing at Eastedge was the idea, we actually applied for this grant from Microsoft for the Hololens to teach people, or it was really anything, but our idea was like a speaking trainer. So I could wear the HoloLens and then put a room full of people in front of me and then measure kind of, some of the voice cues and variations and really get into this kind of a cool mix of AI. And it's really where I got excited about this type of thing. We didn't get the grant, unfortunately, but the idea is like, there's ways that even beyond the typical VR training simulation, oil and gas is using them, medical is using them. There's some interesting things that even broader industry can use, especially when we get into the idea of augmented reality and mixed reality, where it's, something contextual to the world, right? I can put something on top of something that already exists to explain it better. So all those slides broken down into the idea of, I think some of the best use cases for specifically VR, but kind of across the whole spectrum, is the idea of if you need someone to really practice something that's mission critical and dangerous potentially, there's a lot of people practicing surgeries before the surgery, right? You can get a lot of data right now and those iterations. Planning something, someone's talking about architectural visualization or things like that. Obviously, a lot of the engines now are building in either tools to be able to do this and export to VR, but seeing something at scale is incredible. I actually we were building a house, and I kind of built out the structure of what it would feel like to be in there, now with all the texture and everything, and let my wife walk around it. And we made significant changes to the plans before we did it, proved out that entire use case, which is huge. You can take a client through a building, measure that up to a whole building where you're spending, hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion, on a building. I mean, you're going to want to have that type of experience now as table stakes before any type of, significant investment.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Can somebody roll down those sheets? Okay, thank you very much.
And the third one is really this area of support, and that's what I was mentioning a second ago, where you can have data in context of what it's seeing. So vision technologies that understand your environment, create spatial maps, and then anchor context to it that's relevant to what you're seeing in the real world. I won't waste this group's time. Y'all are all smart people of understanding what the market is. You know, these numbers fluctuate all the time, all over the place in terms of what the market size is and whatnot. So I won't spend a lot of time. A lot of that is hype when we talk about separating out the hype in XR. But I think what's more significant to me is that the investment that the platforms have made, and they're working on second and third generation hardware devices within that they're not coming back from this. It wasn't like a drop in the pan experiment where they said, oh yeah, we'll try to capitalize on this and see, but if they see something in it as well, and these companies are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into these platforms and stimulating the ecosystems, putting money in developers' pockets, and trying to get great content and killer apps made for these type of platforms. So I think it's even more exciting and stimulating than it was back in the early days of mobile, because Apple wasn't putting money in their pockets, trust me. They were just saying they're taking money out of our pockets when we were building apps for other people. But I think this is an interesting space where it's like not going to take off as fast, obviously, as mobile is, and it's not as ubiquitous. But I think that there's a lot of great opportunities for businesses to get into it and be subsidized by these big companies that want content.
Good question.
Yeah.
On the previous slide, how much of the 143 billion do you think is accounted for AR?
Yeah, good question. I'd say from things I've seen, it's about 75% of that is going to be mixed reality and AR, just because, VR has its great space and use case, but it's isolating to some degree. I mean, obviously. And
it also has the game light still go with its own one for it.
Right.
Yeah, whereas AR is what seems to have more obvious applications in the
absolutely, and the idea that you can paint a canvas anywhere with the real world, I mean, is a lot attractive. We'll talk in a second about just the idea of the form factor and ergonomics of how it needs to move from right now. AR is most prevalent on a phone device, right? But how does it move to something that's more on our sight line? And that's where we're going to have to innovate and evolve a little bit. Good question. So I always put this slide in here, and if you guys boo me off stage and say, we know all this, fine, go for it. But I always have someone in the room that says, oh, that was interesting. I didn't really understand how, and Ed, even you said that, understanding what XR means in the spectrum. I've seen XR used in a few different contexts, but the way I've always used it is the idea of it's a continuum that encompasses several forms of technology that run from the real world, on one side, and to explain to some of you that are digital natives, this is when I, as a child, used to go outside and play, and I did things with other kids. There was engagement. So that's on one end of the spectrum. Obviously, we use cameras right now and video to capture the real world in a digital sense. Augmented reality, if you think about a sheet of glass that sits in front of your device that you can put static, or not necessarily static, but just content in front of you, but it doesn't necessarily live in the world. It just overlays on the world, right, in terms of understanding. But you're using devices that understand location, have some vision technology to understand where you are, can read QR codes. You've seen these things where you can scan certain things and pop up content and things. So augmented reality kind of sits on that part. And what we're going here is from realism to complete immersion along this continuum. Mixed reality is another kind of multi-use term, but I look at it as the idea of moving from that sheet of glass to something that has a spatial map. So powerful vision technology that builds a cage around the world, so to speak, and then you can anchor and persist content there. So the Hololens was one of the first kind of platforms that I would call that fits into this category. So what it does is you walk around the room, it's building 3D models of everything and refining that mesh. And then it also has location services built into it. So if I say I want to leave a piece of content there, technically speaking, it gets enough data from lots of different elements. And then when someone else comes back to it, that content should be sitting there. So persisting that kind of data. Then obviously virtual reality, which is complete obfuscation and immersion within an environment. You don't really see any of the real world. So. And then there's this interesting middle space when you talk about AR kit and AR core. You kind of live between augmented reality and mixed reality, because you can't anchor content in the real world. And those building like planar meshes and things like that when you use devices on the scale. Yeah.
Where would you put holographic imagery on this?
holographic imagery in itself as a
On the
visual
reality spectrum, right? Because that is a reality, on the reality spectrum visual.
the imaging itself, because it lives in the real world, what device?
So you would put that in mixed reality?
Yeah, it would be somewhere right in here, for sure.
Because you don't need glasses for a lot of holographs, right?
Right. But this is more about like the level of like complete immersion going along this, right? So you're seeing that kind of in the real world, but augmenting it, so definitely in that area. So one interesting output that we had in creating VR experiences, because video is everywhere, right? And that's what people are engaging with the most right now. It's on phones. If any of you have teenage kids like I do, it's constant video streams coming into our house, right? So one way is we ran into that barrier early on of like, well, the hardware is too expensive, or we don't have the space to put up a training center for this kind of thing. But the technology is really interesting. Is we set up this, another use of the term mixed reality, obviously, we set up this green screen lab where we're able to composite like a person in real time interacting with the digital content, but then overlay it with the actual digital content. So what we had here was like context that you could see someone. So they could be working with a large piece of equipment or a 777 or something like that, and you would actually see them next to the equipment, but they wouldn't actually be there. And I'll show an example of what this looks like in a video here in a second. So I think this is kind of like, okay, what we call state of the art right now. I think that when we talk back in the hype train again, I have my own opinions of this. This is Magic Leap, and years ago, they're producing all these videos that look like this, right? It's just like kids and people, or thousands of people are going to be sitting around a gym watching whales jump out of the floor or something like that, which is interesting. And I think the reality now is something like this, right? It's very much like the Hololens, and one of the big things in immersion is the field of view. And it's just all these platforms have a very limited field of view. You're almost framing content within a small rectangle in front of you, which is immersion breaking. It's not quite there yet, but much like my slide on the original Oculus. Okay, think BlackBerry, right? Is that a smartphone? We thought it was at one time, but until we got the iPhone and Android and things like that, that really showed us we're at the BlackBerry stage here. So I give them some grace, right? The idea of like they're trying to get a product to market, and it's very, I think from ergonomic standpoint, this is where I would like to see it go. Now, stylistically, they're going to have to probably change some stuff before everyone's wearing these things around in their everyday life. Information, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I'd probably wear them. I think they're pretty cool, but my wife wouldn't wear these ever, kind of thing. Again, those are the problems that we're going to have to solve with everyone in this room. Because everyone has kind of a piece, it sounds like, from the introductions, which is a great thing, by the way. I've never seen that done.
They sell a beanie with that color on the top, right?
What's that?
They sell it with a beanie with color on the top?
Possibly. That's a pitch it.
Brian, call Omar and tell him to change it, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But what the Magic Leap is it sits on that spectrum and kind of that mixed reality device. It's tetherless, so obviously you have like a pack that's attached to your hip that's for processing, but it's capturing the spatial data, it's being able to put content in it. So it's very similar to the HoloLens, just a little bit more form-fitting and lighter thing. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into a couple of case studies. Remember I told you about the game that we created that was Galaga in the headset. Actually took this to one of our partners at BottleRock at the time. We had just gotten acquired by WPP, which is a large holding company for ad agencies out of London. They parked this under Ogilvy, New York, who had a bunch of clients, obviously, in the food and beverage space. So I said, I got something cool. I got the chocolate, who has the peanut butter kind of thing. So I went out to the network. They said, you need to go talk to Jim Beam. They're looking to do some innovative activations. So I took the Galaga thing to them, met with them for like 15 minutes, and took it off. It was like, so this is it. We don't have to attach any wires to it. We can take this into a bar. And then I got a little worried because it's like, wait a minute, I don't know if you want to take virtual reality into a bar. And this is this is our first client foray into this. So I had a lot riding on the idea that this was a seamless execution. So we did. this was on the first Gear VR device, so I apologize. The outputs we could get were this is showing each eye and what it's seeing. That's the only way we could really output it this time. But we created about a minute and a half experiential where all their customers were doing, cameras, 360 cameras within their distilleries, and so do our virtual tour. We've been doing that since the mid-90s with VR. We wanted to create a CG experience of what it was like to be inside and show the value proposition of how the whiskey was made, and get some buzz going around that. So they took this into about 30 or 40 bars every Friday and Saturday night as part of this activation campaign. And went off great. Nobody got sick. No technical problems with it. It was a developer prototype piece of hardware at that time. So many risks involved in this. But now you see there's dozens of these activations at every show you go to and whatnot. So it was kind of cool to do let's take our gaming experience and create something for Jim Beam that shows off his Devil's Cut brand and gets people talking. It was written up in Adweek magazine and Fortune magazine as being kind of, this is the future of experiential marketing. So I'm so excited to see what happens here at the end. Shots for everyone. That's what they would do. As soon as a person would come down into the glass, they'd take their headset off and they'd have a shot of the Devil's Cut whiskey right there for them. Sorry, I did not bring these.
It's not
So after that client engagement, now I took it out and expanded that network and said, what other industries do we want to kind of tackle? Obviously, healthcare was one of them that Ogilvy had as well. So partnered with Ogilvy Common Health, who had this interesting use case that they wanted to build out a prototype for, of using actual scan data from a toothbrush that could scan the interior of the mouth and take saliva samples and get data, and then upload that for processing in the cloud. And so this AI would look at it and say, here's the problems that I see with the teeth of the person just using their toothbrush to scan it. And then we built it in MR and we built it in VR. So the idea of MR was the patient chart and bringing all that data into it to kind of set up all the things that the doctor needs to check out. But then the doctor, without having to see the patient in the office, could put the headset on and get a high definition detail of the actual scan of the mouth and make assessment. Look at the AI's assessments and validate them, right? Not replacing the dentist, but he can validate those assessments and create a treatment plan. Here's that technique I was talking about of compositing someone on top of the actual 3D data. So we can create all this video of these worlds that don't really exist or aren't practical to set up in a traditional video shoot, to do that as a form of training as well.
And that was using the Htc Vive.
That's right.
So it applies a room scale, is it better than the sensors to do that?
Yeah, this particular one did require the room scale with the sensors, but again, it was just a prototype to prove out.
So,
Yeah.
I watched that, and the first thing I thought was, my arms are going to get tired very fast. What kind of innovations do you see coming in the field of input to AR to try to help with that problem?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when you talk about eye tracking devices, they're starting to come online. Next gen devices are building it in. There's a couple of aftermarket products that I've seen as well. Yeah, I mean, the hands at some point, I think, you're gonna have to lose the controller and have Leap Motion. I don't know if you've heard of them before, but it's an IR sensing kind of thing that can actually build the hands. Then you have to hold heavier controllers.
Right.
So each one of the inputs, I mean, obviously voice control. On this video, you can see here when she pulls up there's voice. Bad video shot, but
right,
all that could be driven from it. Instead of her having to keep her hands out here and select things by sight line and movement, she can also speak the voice commands to make that happen. So a lot of innovation in that space still to come.
But all the focus tracking right now is based on physical movement that they have.
Most of it,
Not
unless they
movement
have.
of the eyes.
Yeah, most of the headsets that are in consumers' hands are head tracking.
But that's got to come quickly, right?
Sure. Yeah, they've announced all the next gen platforms that Facebook and Oculus and HTC are producing are going to have eye tracking.
Pretty soon we'll just sit in a chair in a room and never move all day long. All of us.
So you see Wall-E as well.
I did not, but I could see it coming.
All right, so The use case that really set me on the path to now leave Bottle Rocket and form Eastedge was really in this industrial design and heavy equipment space. I thought that was really, for VR especially, this great opportunity to realize a cost savings and educate people faster in products. So we had actually just finished building a iPad enterprise app for Baker Hughes, a big oilfield services company down in Houston. It has these massive drill bits, and they spend millions of dollars a year shipping these drill bits all over the world and setting them up in trade show booths that require massive footprints. And it just made sense to say, hey, we took all your products and decimated them, retopologized them to be mobile compliant already. Why can't we just take this and move these forward into some kind of environment where you can, visualize these at scale, but then also do some cool things where the walls break away and you see a lithology and you can see it, working down through there like you would in the field. So they were very excited about this. As I come to learn about the oil and gas industry, they're very excited about this, but they're not very excited about spending money on anything. It's very strange.
Funny how that
works. But still pursuing stuff in that industry for some reason. If anyone has contacts in there, I'd love to work with a partner that can get me into that space, though, in terms of my 30-second stand-up. So again, using our compositing technique, this is actually just taking an example of the head of a common drill bit and to show them, what you could possibly do with it, and some of the user experience of having like handheld menus and the pit boy, as I call it, and visualizing this thing in different styles, so being able to see inside of it and create wireframe models of it, and all this in a very immersive environment where you can walk around it and share. There's a companion on the PC to this where I can plant flags and pull out details of certain things, like in a trade show environment, to communicate with the person that's in there. So it's a multi-user environment where we can also have two-way communication between what's happening in the simulation.
So the objective here is they would do this at their trade show, so
Yeah.
the customer would put on the goggles and experience this.
So now you need a 20 by 20 booth instead of a 100 by 150 booth.
If Baker Hughes bought this, what would the cost be?
Well, this is all bespoke development. This isn't a platform that we're licensing. I mean, something like what we built there with their products, I mean, 500,000 to $1 million, somewhere in that range. I mean, it just depends. We had a lot of their content. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused. So the use case was for training of employees, or how to?
Well, it's the training plus I think there's a sales opportunity there to show off products that exist in we have all these models in SolidWorks and content already in the enterprise. How do we reroute that and to drive the bottom line and save money on the trade show experience and give them a better experience while they're at the trade show? I think all three of those things align with that VR solution.
But you're saying they decided not to do this, right? They still want their 100 by 100 booth with their $1 million drill bits on the site.
Well, I'm not saying they didn't do it with another partner or aren't exploring things or wanted to bring it in-house. It just at the time, and that was 5-6 years ago.
I see. I was wondering if they decided, no, we do need to have the physical drill bits there because it's a sales opportunity and there's some value in.
I think the answer was we see extreme value in this as business unit owners. You'll never get it through procurement. I mean, it's just the politics that exist within particular industries, and I'm not saying that there hadn't been innovation and people in that space haven't been doing stuff, because they have.
Yeah.
I'm just saying for our bleeding edge dive into their organization, it was a little too much too soon. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, you need to go talk to the CFO.
But,
Yeah.
That's where you got to focus.
all right. Yeah, I agree.
5 or 6 years ago, the oil and gas industry couldn't spell IoT.
Yeah, I've had many conversations with Flint Hills Refinery and Coke Industry since then, and I mean, there's active conversations still going on in that space that I'm interested in, but it's been a hard road to kind of get someone to write a check.
Yeah, I was just going to add that another application that I can see is also in development. Let's say from a technical standpoint, you want to fix a bug or something after development, improving the offering. I guess this can be great learning.
Right. Yeah, I think that idea of like rapid prototyping and kind of like anything that's because we brought this to Chick-fil-A, and right now Chick-fil-A, when they design a new store concept or a layout, they carve a 2-scale model out of foam core. Okay. My guys, yeah, to scale. So, and I get the whole, like, I can walk around and it's tactile and it's real and we can have conversations about it, but the cost and value output of that versus something like this does not equate.
Just the time saving.
Right.
Like, move that wall. We'll get back to you next week. No, you can't.
So one of the problems it seems like is you're kind of like a bespoke model right now. What are you doing to try and move to more of a generalized platform that serves different industries? Because that's probably how you're going to make real growth.
Well, absolutely, and that's where I think we need, because I've worked and lived in these bespoke and services kind of companies for a while, and we started down early in Eastedge of saying, hey, let's partner with the groups like Coke and that want to like invest in a platform and we can build it for them and then bring it out to other people. You know, it takes a large capital infusion, obviously, and something that I would have to bring on a partner that had some experience and expertise on that front. So right now, I'm just scrambling. We have so much gaming business right now, and we're also doing augmented reality development for ex-Cowboys stars. Also Cowboys or something. So we're building a lot of apps on that front too. We have so much work for hire right now that I'm kind of, it's hard to keep focus on that, right? It's that weird interim sales period where we made it to the bottom of the J curve now, but it's like how do we keep our focus on the big picture like you're talking about?
Right.
So, yeah, it's a challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
Matt, what about, like I've got several government contractors that support the Air Force bases out in Cobalt Beach. You know, and they'll build crews, they'll build stuff up, and they'll build pods and get blown up. And then they'll have receivers that are recording every kind of electronic monitoring or communication with bad guys. But if you look in that space either to understand what they're doing in virtual reality, understand who's providing that, and where your skill sets or IP they may not have, or there's a lot of crazy money right now in government contracts, and the money's flying around. So I was just curious if that you guys, well, but I mean, as far as, you know, everything from shipbuilding and the Coast Guard, moving money out, there's a lot of, have you looked into that space just to understand?
Not in the governmental side and the defense side. Obviously, it's something that's been talked about, and I know like the Army has spent, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars on realistic simulations and things like that. So I know it's a right space. The exciting part about this, while it's still kind of nascent, you know, is the idea that all these industries, I think, have use cases in there. And right now, the problem is scale and finding other people to go out. Because right now, I'm evangelizing this, I'm selling it, I'm leading the production teams to develop it. You know, I'm trying to do probably too many things, and it's time to kind of take that next step, just so we don't miss out on those types of.
I just wonder, in the case of the military, that they could spawn competitors to you. That, you know, they're getting funded, they're doing things, and then boom, they come to the commercial side, and they kind of blindside themselves.
Yeah, no, it's a great perspective.
A proactive too, just kind of see, or you know, some people fighting from behind.
Absolutely. Well, we're already getting the $50,000 to $100,000 funding. It sounds like for the.
Well, they've got programs. They've really embraced the other transactional authority, and any acquisition command has that prerogative where it's not even under contract. They just prototype.
Right.
And I do know for a fact that they have dramatic requirements from a training perspective and also from a mission rehearsal perspective, because a lot of special mission units want to be able to actually walk through the building before they kick the door down. And my question to you is, have you ever looked at LiDAR data as a data source in order to build a virtual reality structure?
I have not.
Because the entire city of Baghdad is on LiDAR. I mean, they spent a lot of money, and as you know, LiDAR gives you a three-dimensional view inside of structures.
Yeah, in some of those areas, like I don't know if you've seen Google Earth's VR implementation or not, it's just amazing the level that they're able to kind of extract form and walk down. And you can literally walk down a New York City street going from, you know, to typical Google Earth view but then they've now combined it with Street View. So now you can hop down and do 360 videos of actual live capture from the cars, and you can walk around New York. I've showed my son like multiple spots in New York, having never been there himself, but it's like he knows New York in a weird kind of digital way.
So you had a use case earlier of the dentist, which I thought was really a great.
Which one? I'm sorry.
The dentist.
Oh, the dentist. Yeah.
Great application. Do you guys, A, do you divorce yourself from the back end, and B, if you don't, what do you do? Like, because security for something like that is insanely strict, right? Requirements have to be there because you're talking about very sensitive data. So what are you guys doing for the back end if you aren't divorcing yourself?
We're definitely the front end UX type team. Ogilvy Common Health, who we worked with on that project, handles all that back end security and infrastructure, all the like HIPAA type stuff as well. That's kind of their level of expertise. So that's all department type relationships. So we've been talking a lot about some mixed reality, a lot about VR. Here's a quick example that I put together for a pitch I did at Boeing last year for what it might look like. Not to do something at full scale, but understand how you might could walk around. And this was a multi-user app where an instructor at the front of a room might be able to plan something in AR, walk around it, point out certain aspects of the jet while the students are seeing it at full scale. So they would be in VR headsets. So this is all like communicating the same data back and forth, but the idea that you can use, this is just any mobile phone that you can put this content down here. It has spatial audio, so as you get closer to certain things, they're going to get louder, pull back from it, pull up contextual detail about how something works. But have this, I think the most powerful combination between AR and VR is this shared experience based in the context of where you're at and what you're doing. So at any time you can pick up a device and have an experience based on what you have available. So this was a prototype to really just pull out that example of how this would work for them. My wife was very confused about how this thing got in our kitchen. So, just want to kind of end with, like I said, this kind of puzzle. And bonus points for anyone who can name the movie.
Oh, Back to the Future, Part 2.
1, 2, 3. Okay, I don't have any prizes, but.
I love that movie.
So I thought, obviously Hollywood drives a lot of our technical innovations and things like that. So I thought that was pretty funny. And Back to the Future 2, that he had his VR headset. But I think the product that's going to win is something, speaking back to contextual relevance, is can I have a device that moves between AR, MR, and VR? It's one singular device that's a lightweight ergonomic. I still think we're 5 to 10 years at least away from something like that, but that's going to be the killer platform. Otherwise, we're going to be grabbing this for one experience, that for another one, and humans will always default back to what's the lowest common denominator, the easiest to use that the rest of my data is on, which is the mobile phone device. So in pursuing XR right now, pursuing ARKit and AR Core type of experiences on mobile devices is probably the safest business proposition in my opinion. But when we get there, the amount of data that we can capture on a day-to-day basis of vision technology about the spaces that we're in, the locations that we're at, the actions our hands are taking, the things we're saying to people, all this kind of, we're throwing privacy out for this conversation. That's a whole other topic that we can talk about. But the data is what I care about. If we can capture all that, then the next piece of the puzzle is obviously processing that in real time. The importance of 5G, high-speed networks to be able to, in real time, send all that data up to a server to be able to process with AI and give us what I call actionable insights. Because it all doesn't matter at the end of the day if we have these massive data sets if we don't know what to do with it. And there's not enough humans on Earth that are going to be able to process all that data, certainly not in real time, to be able to give us an actionable insight of something that it might recommend that we want to do when we're in the context of a particular environment using a certain device, right? So the idea of like this cycle, and then that insight gives you the ability to make another choice or an action, which is captured again, that's learned from, and these profiles continue to go around and mature themselves into you know, something that gives us value as human beings, to be able to make a better choice, to be able to understand something better, to learn better. And that's just what I get excited about. I mean, I live mainly in Marty McFly's realm over here. It sounds like everyone in this room has the keys to this puzzle and is driving in these silos. But until we can bring these silos together to really change the human experience, I think it will just be that, interesting innovations within silos. So that's what I have for you this morning, but happy to answer any questions.
Well, my question is, you mentioned about the real-time processing capabilities. So my question would be, what is the latency in that if you're dealing with the real-world environment, you're augmenting it? I'm actually thinking of remote-operated autonomous vehicles and robotics and things like that. What's the latency on that kind of interaction? Do you have an idea?
Well, especially it depends on the fidelity of what you're doing, but it could be massive, and I think that's where you have to get creative, and you have kind of parallel some insights being offloaded to the server to be able to chew on, but some of them are doing client side as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking like forget the linkage, right? The data linkage. I'm thinking more like let's say that you've got the ability to hardwire to a certain point. Like what does it take for the system right now in its current state to process that data and feed it back so that your interactions are accurate?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I'm the expert to answer that question on like latencies and things like that. That's definitely probably someone in this room could.
I'm looking high level. I'm just trying to figure out like how far away we are from, you know, as close to real time as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of like streaming, if you look at like the NBA has got a contract with, I can't remember the name of the company now, but they have this kind of cool mixed reality experience where you're watching a 360 video capture of a game courtside, but then they have a layer that lives on the perimeter of that of CG that are people interacting with each other. And I've tried it a couple times, and there's very low latency on that experience, even though it's a web-based, you know, type of experience. So you imagine if that works, I imagine talking hardware to the point would even be better, right? And that thing. But yeah, the game is streaming, and it has hiccups every once in a while. But the really cool experience about that is I could be next to a person discussing the game with them and watching it from a view I could never afford in a real venue. So
what you're talking about requiring some millisecond.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like if we're having a robot doing kind of more of a precision task, like, and I can understand the imperceptibility of some latency, and if you've got a human operator, then that's the buffer.
So the issue at hand is that if you go to a central store for the content, right, and you have to deliver it from the edge to the store to the edge. Right. You're going to blow that, right?
Right. That's
one of the problems in autonomous vehicles is the latency issue, which is why edge computing is so paramount in deploying that, even with the 5G deployments, right? You need the sub-millisecond latency to do that. So if you want to do that, then you're basically going to go and work with an edge to a central store.
Yeah. I'm more thinking of the like you've got a highly skilled operator, you know, the surgeon. I'm working with a team right now that does robotic tables that literally move the patient so they can open up the incision so they can get to the right part of the science.
So at that point, you're putting the user as the processor. Right. At that point,
that's I'm thinking of more of a refresh on
if the user's just consuming it, then it's not as big.
You're
the operator, whether it's mining or manufacturing or medical or whatever. I'm just trying to figure out like how real time is the latency so you don't overshoot a mark or something like that.
Again, I think there's people in this room that have more expertise than me. We haven't done a lot of work with like using VR as an input for hardware, right? It's more about consuming content digitally.
Audio aspect. He's trying to improve the audio experience on the gear.
I know that
Can you repeat the question?
Can you repeat the question?
So you're talking about spatial audio, specifically on the Gear VR?
Right, but my question is more having to do with the fact that, at least when I first got into the VR space about 4 years ago, the impression I had was people were still so taken by the wow factor of the immersive video that not much attention was being paid to the audio. Audio was always kind of an afterthought.
Right.
And I think things have improved since then. But I was just wondering where you see that.
Sure. I think the biggest step in making spatial audio interesting was when we did positional tracking and 60 degrees of freedom. That's like with the headsets, I can move in and out and be close to things and hear them, or with the devices understanding location with anchor content like you saw in the video. It's like get closer to something that audio can make. Otherwise, it's just kind of doing tricks and teleporting to certain areas and you hear something louder. Right. So I think as humans, we're very sensitive and in tune to the idea of like, I can hear you better now because I'm closer kind of thing. And as long as you can mimic those movements within a virtual environment, the audio is going to have a lot more impact and subtlety.
Because in my opinion, being an audio guy, I think the audio is as important for the total immersive
I wouldn't disagree with you, for sure.
Probably more important.
So for the type of devices that you use, are there case-by-case uses for the different experiences? So like, if say you were using Meta and they just shut down, so now what are you going to do with that? Or, with the Quest coming out in the spring, are you going to try to hold off a project for Quest?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's an advantage going back to using like an abstracted platform like Unity, who are managing those relationships with the platforms and finding the right ones that hopefully will survive and last. But we try to keep it at not necessarily lowest common denominator, but there's a core level of data and experience that hopefully can be ubiquitous across all of them, and then one that has specialty features, obviously. None of those things, so you get what I'm talking about, to go there. But we haven't really. The ones that we bet on have been the Vive and the Oculus Rift. That in most experiences, obviously there's a chance they could go somewhere, but interestingly enough, like most of the projects that we built, it just depends on the camera rig that we put in there and the input controls, and then we can turn it into a PC-based rectangular experience from there. So a lot of times clients will want both. They'll say, well, we want a VR experience to take to a trade show, we want to take to a training seminar, but we also want people that are going to be doing traditional CBT to have that embedded within the internet or something like that.
I don't know how many people have experienced the void at Cinema West. I thought they did a great job on an immersive experience. You feel heat with the volcano, you can hear, you can see each other as stormtroopers, and they seem to be evolving that to a variety of...
Yeah, a lot of people would argue that the best potential growth environment for VR right now is in that kind of theme park or high-end experiential. Yeah, the void's great, and the idea that it just proves that visualization experience needs so much more, whether it's the audio or whether it's I remember I did one years ago with the Game of Thrones experience at South by with the wall. So there was like you would step into the actual cage and go up the wall and then blow cold air on you. It sounds very similar to the void and whatnot. But that was on that old terrible headset that I told you about, the first one. And I was just like, it made it 100 times better. So you're right. I mean, I think Disney and groups like that, as they start to incorporate these type of experiences. Now, there's a lot of challenges that, like getting people in and out of the headset, how to clean them between people. I mean, there's just so many of these like logistical challenges that have to be worked out with this headwear as well. That's why I think it's really not going to reach its full potential and scale until everybody kind of like their phones has their own that can then tether onto an experience in the environment that they're in. So it's like my personal hardware. Now I'm experiencing what everyone else is experiencing in the theme park, and that data is being streamed to me based on the ride internet or something.
You don't have to worry about me, guys.
So it's valid.
I would,
sure.
Do you see anything done with contacts?
I have not. It's definitely interesting. I mean, I've heard of all these like direct retinal projection to help the field of view by doing projectors that basically.
What was that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, that's an interesting space. I just haven't really delved into it much.
All right, last question, and then we'll Matt will stay around for a while, and we have room till 10:30. So.
What about the collaboration suites? If you're talking about a platform approach, that's one that would reach out across industries and different customers. Have you seen people looking at collaboration?
Collaborating between...
Like a virtual WebEx.
Oh, yeah, no, I've seen, like, there's more of the kind of on the chat rooms, and I equate it to like back in the early 90s when, you know, that was like the first thing that everybody wanted to do is build visual chat kind of thing. I think we're at that stage with this, and I think some tools are spinning out, and obviously companies are getting funded on that thing to do business collaboration or remote collaboration type thing. I think that's a huge space that really depends on a lot of the backbone of this network infrastructure and data security and all this kind of stuff. Just not the area that my company is really to this point focused on. We're more on the experiential side and kind of the idea of reutilizing content in the enterprise to be able to use it across lots of different channels. But yeah, a huge space.
All right, guys, let's give him a hand right up.